Why might someone convince themselves to be the best in the world for what they do? And yes, I did say the best in the world. Let's take a look. This is Prosperity and Something Greater. My guest today is Jay Henderson. Now, you'll hear the story of how Jay and I met, and as we point out, there is a very valuable business lesson in that story. And Jay and I started out in a strictly professional relationship, but as often happens with like-minded and like-hearted people, we have become friends. Jay is a performance expert, leadership expert, and you can find out a lot more about Jay and how to work with him at jhenderson.org. His book, The Ultimate Small Business Guide to Hiring Superstars, is something anyone who has ever tried to hire someone needs on their desk and at their fingertips. At realtalenthiring.com, you can learn more about Jay's diagnostic test for hiring that is now required for anyone I advise who wants to make better, much better hiring decisions. And when I think of the word professional, I think of Jay Henderson. He is always a gentleman and always a beacon of integrity. Jay likes to say, always take the high road. And he inspired me quite a while ago to just strive to do that. And it isn't often easy and can take often every ounce of maturity that I've got, but it is always the best path. It's actually a very selfish thing to do too, because it always makes things easier and better when I manage to pull it off. I consider it an honor to be able to share my friend and his wisdom about prosperity with you. Jay Henderson. All right. Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to the podcast today. Today with me is a good friend of mine and someone whose safety I pray for every day, because what he does for our members is so incredibly valuable in helping them make high quality decisions in their hiring. Jay Henderson, it's good to talk to you, buddy.
Well, thank you. And it's always great to talk to you. I sincerely appreciate that. And I sincerely mean it. Glad to be here.
Hey, so I'm going to ask you a question, and I didn't prepare you for this question, so we'll see how you do. And it's not a test, but do you remember when we met?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Would you share?
Yeah. So for business people, this can be actually instructive too. I had a neighbor, go ahead.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. It's very instructive. So that's why I asked.
Yeah. I had a neighbor who I walked with every morning. We would get up and exercise, and we would talk business and marketing. He owns a business, and there was the 2008 crash, just at the end of '08 had just happened. And so I was, the big word today is pivot. With what we're going through now, I've heard so many people say, if I hear that word pivot again, but anyway, and I was basically trying to figure out some things. He said to me, like, so, well, Jay, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I decided that I'm going to go work with personal injury attorneys and doctors and what have you, and brick and mortar business owners that aren't big corporations. So anyway, he said, well, great, because next month I'm heading up to Virginia and I'm going to a conference. And why don't you just come with me and be my guest? I've got a trade show booth there and I've got a hotel room. You can stay with me and blah, blah, blah. So we went up together and we arrived late and walked into the hotel. And it had to be 11 o'clock at night. And you and Tom Foster were setting up. And we walked straight over to you. Timothy, brought me straight over to you guys and said, this is Tom Foster and this is Rem Jackson. And guys, this is my friend Jay, my neighbor. And here's what Jay does for me. And you said, can you do that for podiatrists? I said, yes. And you said, okay, well, we'll talk. I mean, I remember it like it was yesterday. I even remember the look in your eyes when you were looking at me as Timothy was describing what I do for people. And it was a very inquisitive look. Not only was it inquisitive, but it was also kind of like, well, we'll see. Because I'm going to make sure that that's true. There was some of that look too, which I welcomed. And anyway, and that was it. That was the first part of it. That's when we actually met.
That's exactly right. And then I remember the part that really clicks into me was when you followed up. So at the meeting, you're like, hey, you came over and you just followed up. You did what the appropriate business response is. You didn't think, I was a nice guy, I should probably get in touch with him sometime. You followed up. I had your card. And I said, look, here's what we'll do. I mean, I'm totally absorbed with all of this, but connect with me, next week or so. And we'll discuss what you do. And then you did. You followed up. And the thing about it that I've always thought about you is you're just such a professional. You are so appropriate and you just really know you have enormously high communication skills and you just handled everything so well. And I said, look, here's the thing. I'm interested. This is definitely needed, but I'm going to need you to prove to me that you say you have this instrument, you have this ability to really take a look at how people are going to behave, not now in the interview, not the first week, but in 3 months later when the real person emerges. And I need you to work with some of my folks and just to put the time in with, we're not charging anybody. We're just figuring this out. And you said, Rem, whatever I need to do. And then you just did every single thing. And then we started to be astounded by what you are able to do. But I remember this so well. So my good friend, Mary Ashmore, who was president of her own company down in Texas, it was an educational technology company. And I was advising her at the time because I'd had a history in educational technology. And I just love Mary. She's just so great. And we had to fill this one position. And it is a really niched, super complicated, just to have the skill set for this is there aren't many people that could do what we needed. And she found someone. So the review and you said, okay, well, this is going to be a problem. Let me tell you why. And, you've always said, only 30% of your decision should ever be based on the information you give people. There's lots of other things you do. But you said, I think in 6 months, you're going to probably end up firing this person for these following reasons. Because you also knew Mary's profile too. And so we said, okay, we're going to do it. And so we hired that person. And almost to the day, 6 months later, we had to let her go for exactly what you said. And that was the day I said, I'm never not going to listen to Jay again as long as I live. You always say, you can manage against this, you can do this, but you knew, knowing the personalities involved, that was going to be complicated. And that's why I joke about how I pray for your safety, because I don't know anyone else that does what you do. And anybody wants to find Jay, the link to his website is in the information for the podcast. But that's when we met. And ever since then, it's just been a joy. And your history, which I really kind of want to get to in a minute, but you deeply think about your life and prosperity and what it is. So Jay, let's just go there. I mean, how do you define prosperity for you?
Yeah, it's such a great question because obviously, I mean, you got to put some thought into this, don't you? It's critical to have a life philosophy. Everybody sort of does, but if you don't really sort of define yours the way you really want it to be, then you're kind of, I don't know, waffling in the wind maybe too often. It's sort of like everybody has a business system. It's just either a bad one or it's usually just a bad one. and so if you don't sort of choose your philosophy of life or at some level, you're going to be in trouble. So, and it's funny how these things change over time too. As I thought about this concept of being prosperous and prosperity, I even went and looked up the specifics on, just to get my head really clear so that I could talk about this wisely. It changes over time, not daily, right? And man, right now, with the way things are, prosperity could sure mean like a safe country, a safe community. That plays such a big role, doesn't it? But over time, when I remember being 25 and full of energy and looking at the future and not knowing anything, I thought prosperity was just go get rich. But to me today, it's a combination of things, really. I think of sort of having my life in order, overcoming myself. That's one of my big sort of personal tenets. I sort of want to overcome Jay, meaning, my own problems and be the best that I can possibly be because, wherever you go, there you are. If I've got to be with myself all the time, I sort of want to like that. And I think also of a definition, I guess it's not really, but Stephen R. Covey one time said something. Success is the ability to bring success to everything you do, no matter where you go, which I found that to be a powerfully interesting sort of thought, right? And that kind of caveat stayed with me for a while. And then it also made me think of, I believe priorities come before goals. And a lot of times people are very goal oriented, and too often their goals do not actually align with their priorities. And, have you ever found yourself in a situation in life where 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, and you sort of get places, but then you sort of don't as well. And I think that comes from having a misalignment of values, and your goals probably aren't aligned enough with your true priorities, because we achieve our priorities. We don't always achieve our goals because our goals aren't always aligned. You know what I mean? But we do achieve our priorities. It's kind of interesting that way. So I started thinking in terms of being prosperous that way as well, because to me, family is everything. For instance, I'd rather my wife be happy and my children be safe, that they can grow and become happy people or whatever, than to make a lot of money. I mean, if I went out and became a billionaire, I would be unhappy if my children weren't happy. Right? So prosperity to me is all these things. And then finally, I sort of thought about my 4 R's. I have what I call my 4 R's, and they are to be real, which means to never lie to yourself, and to be righteous, which to me means know your values, know your priorities, and live in alignment with that. That's what I mean by righteous. Living in alignment with your values and your priorities, right? To be robust, frankly, I call it ripped because I like that language better. I'm thinking of robust as a physical, mental, and emotional power, strength in all those areas. I want to be healthy, physically strong. I want to be mentally tough, and I want to be emotionally strong. And then the 4th R is rich, which I really call richness, because to me, if I'm real, righteous, and robust, I'll have riches. I'll have a richness of life. So to me, prosperity is sort of overcoming J and being my best, loving my family, and having my family be healthy and okay. And then I sort of strive to bring a level of success to everything that I do. That's part to me of overcoming J. And I can do that through those 4 R's, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense to me. The only thing I'll say is I'm just slightly disappointed that one of those R's wasn't REM. I was expecting.
Well, I could only give you 4. You told me, Jay, I'll give you 4 R's and that's it. If there was a fifth, it
Yeah, right.
certainly would have been
No,
you.
that's so clear to me. So, Jay, what was the defining moment or event that really brought you to your career path? People really would be interested to know that story.
That's kind of easy for me. It's amazing. There's 3, but the one key, right? So basically, when I was about 25, I was going through a really tough life transition, and I ended up from college back home. And so let me go now backwards to when I was about 23. I was living in Las Vegas, where you are now, right? I was on a mission for my church, and my father sent me the audio tape series to the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen R. Covey. And the book had not been published yet. So I listened to those tapes just almost memorized. I learned very well auditorially, and I listened to them a lot. And then later, in a couple years later, I was with my father. We were walking through the small mall called Jacksonville Landing in Jacksonville, Florida. And my father and I together, and my dad noticed a bookstore. There was a bookstore, and he noticed the cover of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People book now, right? He said, hey, check that out. So he walked over and he bought 2 copies, handed me one. And man, I read that thing. I just really bought into that material and I loved the book and I read till it was tattered and torn. Then that takes us up to where I was in this life transition. So one day we were in Raleigh, North Carolina. My dad said, hey, do you want to run down to Augusta, Georgia to watch the Masters together, the golf tournament? I said, heck yeah. So we jumped in the car and we drove just to the practice round one day. And that was a great event. But on the way home, he said to me, he started asking me questions. I said to him, Dad, I really don't know what I want to do. I'm so stuck. I just am really in big transition. He's a sharp guy and he started asking me questions. It turned out to be a very intuitive coaching session for me, so to speak. And one of the things that I learned from that is, as I answered these questions, is that I really did want to teach people material that was so powerful for me when I was 19 years old. Audio tapes that I had listened to that I got from my dad, like Dennis Waitley and Wayne Dyer and Jim Rohn and all these personal development minded people that, I'm 19 years old and I hadn't thought much beyond where are my friends and where are we hanging out tonight and what are we going to do, unfortunately, at that stage. So I hope I'm not talking too long here, but basically, I had read that book. So here I was now, we were driving together and he asked me all these questions. And then that night or the next night, after him asking me all these questions, I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do. I'm in this transition. I'm living with my parents. I'm like 25 years old. So I knelt down beside my bed and I prayed about what to do. And I had a picture come into my mind. And the picture was, I'll just say Brigham Young University, which I really had never been there before. But I knew in my mind somehow, weirdly in my mind, I had that's what it was. And so I got off on my knees and I walked over to my dad and I said, Dad, I know what I'm going to do. And he said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to go to Provo and I'm going to go to school at BYU and I'm going to work for Stephen R. Covey. And he said, that is awesome. When are you going? And I said, tomorrow morning. So I packed up and I jumped in the car and I drove across the country. I didn't have an apartment. I knew one person that lived there. And I called her on the way there and I said, look, I'm going to be needing an apartment, a place to stay, blah, blah, blah. She said, just come see me. Here's my address. When you get here, we'll hook you up. And it was, and 3 months later, I was working for Stephen R. Covey. Those are the sort of the defining moments that led me to my career path.
I just think that's so cool. And I mean, so Tim Ferriss, who wrote, the 4-Hour Work Week and so many other great things, he has a fabulous blog. One of the points in the 4-Hour Work Week is, if you're going to do something, think about playing at the top because no one else thinks they can do that. The real competition is in the middle because that's where everybody's at. Nobody thinks they can go to the top. Nobody thinks I'm going to go work with and collaborate with Stephen R. Covey. And so you went, and 3 months later, you're working with him and helping him really as he put together the leadership center there.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't really like his right-hand man.
Right.
They were already rolling pretty good. The 7 Habits was obviously out, and I was the 189th hire. And then we ended up with 850. So I still got to really have an amazing experience with the growth of the organization and really cut my teeth as a very young man on leadership and management and what have you. And it's, what you're saying is awesome that you're quoting Ferriss about going to the top. You just reminded me on that drive with my dad from Augusta, Georgia, back home to Raleigh, as we talked about what I really want to do is to help people understand their potential and how that their thinking is at the essence of accessing that potential. One of the things my dad said to me is, why don't you become a sports psychologist? After an hour of beating around what interested me. And I said, what is that? And he educated me on that a little bit. I have a younger brother who had become one of the top junior golfers in America. He traveled in the American Junior Golf Association, played against Tiger Woods in tour events and what have you. And he was the number one junior in America when he was 15 and 16. And so my dad had run into that whole world and that whole sports psych world. And I didn't even know it, but I got pretty pumped about that, to the point where a few years later, when I was in fact working for Covey, another guy and I, a guy named Dick Roth, who won a silver medal in the 1964 Olympics as a swimmer, he and I were at Covey, and we were building the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Athletes together. But one day on a flight from Atlanta, Georgia to Provo, and I was working for Covey, and I'm in Atlanta. I'm sitting in the airport, and at that time in my life, I liked to be the last person on the plane. I traveled very light. Everybody was getting in that line and cramming themselves onto the plane and picking their seat. And I already knew, hey, I've got my seat. It's, 32B or whatever, And so I just thought, I'll just be last. I don't care. And I'm standing there and I look in the line getting on my plane. And there at the end of the line is the number one sports psychologist in the world. And his name was Bob Rotella. He's from Virginia. And my brother was working with Rotella. And I was like, oh my gosh. I think that's Bob Rotella. So I stand up and I walk over and I'm behind him. And he sort of, he's standing there and he sort of turns around to look around and he sort of, his face sort of toward me now. And I said, excuse me. And, yes, I said, you wouldn't happen to be Bob Rotella? And I was pretty convinced because I had videotape of him and what have you. And he said, yeah, I am. And I said, hey, I'm Jay Henderson. Michael's my brother and my dad, Dan, and what have you, and oh, wow. So we get on the plane and we're flying. It's a 4-hour flight from Atlanta to Salt Lake. And we're on this flight and we end up sitting together. It was like amazing. Here I am moving towards sports psychology. It's one of my favorite. I studied it. I read every book I could on it. Here I am with like the guy. And before we got all separated back to our usual seats to get off the plane, he said to me, whatever you do, just convince yourself that you can be the best in the world at what you do. And I think of that story, Rem, because of what you're bringing up, Tim Ferriss. Go for the top. And in all honesty, since we're talking prosperity and you're interviewing me, struggled with that. That's not an easy thing to do, is to just, okay, I'll convince myself to be the best. You're really the best in the world, really? 7 billion people, and we all know our weaknesses better than anyone. But that was a powerful thing, because here's the number one guy on the brain and performance. And that was his line to me before we departed, convince yourself. You got to put a little thought into that, because if you really sit down and analyze that, there's so much in what he just said. When you understand the way the mind works and human performance and talent and access to talent, convince yourself. Interesting.
That's the key. Brilliant. I will never forget this. Convince yourself. And in just talking to, when I work with doctors, it's complicated for them sometimes to recommend, like, for instance, orthotic devices with podiatrists are really, really helpful to people. They straighten them out. It's like glasses for somebody who needs their eyes corrected. They do these for the human body. And it's a wonderful thing. Insurance companies maybe don't pay for it. It's cash or whatever. They really struggle with making that recommendation. And my point to them always is, you have to believe, first and foremost, you are absolutely doing the right thing for someone. And if you don't, then don't do it. That's not okay. But convince yourself, so that the doubt will, it'll always flare its little self up, but it will be easy to quash because you've convinced yourself you can be at the top of your game. You can be the number one at what you want to do. And as you go for that, you will land so much higher than if you didn't. Oh, I love that. Well, Jay, let's move on a little bit. I just want to make one last comment, and then I want to ask you a question. Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People is really the first book I read back in the 80s about this kind of stuff. And it's had more impact. I'm a Napoleon Hill devotee. I just think Napoleon Hill and what he wrote in Think and Grow Rich and all that's happened since is incredible. And there's so many other things. But personally, for me, it was Stephen Covey. And I've often just said, that book is the blueprint for the mature human being that I think we all strive to be. So I couldn't recommend that more. Jay, let's move on. We all have challenges. We all have obstacles that we face. And I'm just curious, Can you share what you deal with? What can trip you up on your daily journey?
Yeah, harder question. The first one was a little easier, but okay. So I don't want to. Sorry, I have a thing about talking about myself. It's not easy for me, but I kind of, if I look back on my life, I've always been a very fun-loving, in the moment person, and I like people, and I like to have fun. In fact, I don't like stuffy, stodgy, overly structured, it just, that is just me. And but the fun loving part has been good for me in my life, because in the being in the moment, when you're in the moment, it's sort of like everything's okay. You know, all your guilt comes, and maybe shame and negative self-esteem type stuff, that all comes from the past, really, if you think about it. All the fear, the worry, the concern, that comes from thinking about the future. So being in the moment, right? You don't have those things weighing on you as much. And so I've always sort of been pretty happy. The problem is things can really fall apart on you, right? if you're not paying attention to the future, at least keeping things on the rails. And if you don't have like a system, I'm lugging that into the structure piece that core sort of isn't something I move toward. Things can fall apart. I found that great leadership is being able to think about the past and the present and the future all at the same time. People that can do that, or that get themselves to do that, you can see the patterns of things by being aware of the past. You can see what is happening now, which is critical from an execution standpoint. To get things done, you've got to be in the now. That's an is, not what ought to be, but an is. That's the moment. Then there's the future, which is what ought to be. But so if you can kind of tie the people who are good in leadership can do those three things at the same. So for me, I'm not great about that. I don't think enough about. So as a result, I don't prepare well enough typically for things. I try to more. I'm older now. I'm a little more mature. I've learned a lot. You know, I'm a little more patient, and so as a result, I'm better at those things than I used to be. But that trips me up a lot because I don't prepare enough and think enough about the future. And there's probably a lot of other things that trip me up I'm not aware of. I'll tell you this. You at the beginning of the call, you brought up the how I read people, the review I do, and what have you of people, and I've done all that on myself, of course. And there's a man who trained me in this science that I utilize, and I met him after when I left Covey. I went right down the road to another company where we taught leaders and managers of Fortune 500 companies how to coach other people to higher levels of performance. And that was like right in my bailiwick. It was even better than the 7 Habits in a way, right? Anyway, when I got there, they had me take the science, use the science. And then 3 months later, the worldwide guru came out to our company and trained all of us in that science. And he and I went to lunch. This guy is like, again, a worldwide scientist as it pertains to objective measurement of human performance. And so he said to me, Jay, you could build a Fortune 500 company. And my head's just, filling up the room, And he said, the problem is you would destroy it as fast as you built it. And so I'm being quite transparent with you, just you and I here on this call. But but that's what I mean by not preparing enough, not being systematized enough. And I'm glad he said that to me because really it helped me pay more attention there. Anyway, that's.
And you have shared that with me in the past. That's very familiar to me as the friends that we've been in and the things we've talked about. So, okay. Well, then what's the top strategy that you use to try to keep you from slipping back into those old habits?
Daily morning routine, daily morning ritual. The best, highest performers in the world have performance routines. Everyone has things that block their performance, and you've got to know what that is. Socrates stuff, know thyself kind of stuff, right? You've got to really know if you're going to be great, you got to know what you don't do well so that you can delegate it out. Don't try to become great at what you're not good at. You got to, get rid of that, get it off your plate, block it. And so the analogy I would use is golf pros who are the best in the world at swinging a golf club, you know, they have what they call swing faults. Because the body, you talked about biomechanics for the feet, right? Well, there's biomechanics. Every body is different, and the biomechanics of a golf swing is different for each human being, right? And so every person has their own unique faults as it pertains. So what the pro golfers do is they have what they call key swing thoughts. They know when they see a golf ball do a certain thing that it shouldn't do from their golf swing, it instantly triggers them to know, okay, I didn't have the right thinking to do something differently in my swing. Am I making sense, Rem? I don't want to be convoluted.
Oh, no, this is great.
So the idea is that every morning I do several things. I read, I pray, I work out, and I have a loose plan for my day because I'm a detailed guy for results and tasks, but I'm not a big planner like I talked about earlier, looking in the future. But I do some planning generally, and I read my profile. I read the key elements of how I think and make decisions and the strategies that I have written on there to overcome Jay. So that's what I do. I find that, and you take the coronavirus dynamic and being a business owner and a leader, having teams and like employees, and all of a sudden we can't go to the office. And our routine for all of us, right, has just been messed up. If yours has not been, then good for you. But I mean, right? So just think about what it has been like to all of a sudden be in a quarantine and be forced out of your normal routine and what that has been like for you. And for many people, it's been very, very bad. I hope not, but it's been really rough. And that just shows you the power of habit. And so, having a good habit, a powerful, enriching, focusing strategy like a daily morning routine is really, I have found it to be extraordinarily beneficial. I learned that from the sports psych world, right? Because I mean, look, on this call, probably a lot of surgery driven podiatrists. I mean, surgeons have pre-surgery routines, strategies, routines that are designed to get themselves in the physical and mental state they want to be in to perform at their highest during surgery. CEOs have pre-meeting routines. Pro basketball players have pre-shot routines at the foul line. You can watch them. They do this. They have Jack Nicklaus, the golfer, he knew that it was literally 1.9 seconds from the time that because he would get behind the golf ball, look where he wanted to hit it, visualize it, then he would set up to the shot, they called it. He'd go set up to the shot, and it was literally 1.9 seconds from the time he set up to hit the ball every single time. So, you know what I mean? It's the best in the world. So I've tried to adopt that strategy of that's what I've got to do to help me pay attention the right way.
I think that's great. And I will say that the more I pay attention to all of this, that routine, that ritual, and everybody has their own kind of take and version of it,
right,
is absolutely universally, it's key. It's just utterly key. Jay, so the people that are listening to this podcast, they're interested in trying to achieve their own version of prosperity. Beyond what you've already shared, which is wonderful, any additional advice that you could share?
I think there's nothing more powerful than having a vision. So a quick story. I don't know how much time we have, but
You have all the time you need, Jay.
Told a few stories about my dad before all those other stories I told. He had a sales position and he did very well, and he had just bought a new vehicle, and we were driving down the road, and I was young, and I was, I thought I was happy, but I was not happy. We were driving along, and I was thinking to myself, I was really in my head, and rare for me. I was thinking to myself some things, and he said to me, what are you thinking about? And I said, a bit belligerently, what makes you think I'm thinking about anything? Now, just remember, I was 18 years old. I was a teenager, right? So, he said, well, you're my son, and I know you, and tell you're thinking about something. And I said, well, Dad, ultimately you love and trust your dad, right? So I said, I'm trying to figure out, what am I going to do? What, just in this moment, it just, when I get in this car, this nice car that he's bought, I'm like, man, this is a really nice car. Then all of a sudden I started thinking, how am I going to do that? What am I going to, one of the first few moments I thought about the future, as we talked about earlier. And he said, well, Jay, I can tell you what you're going to be like 10 years from now. Would you like to know? And I said, yeah, and he said, you are going to be exactly like you've always pictured yourself to be like. And it, sort of for me in that moment, it was like a literal epiphany like moment for me. I mean, I just had this vision come into my mind. And I will tell you that the reason I share the story is because rather than writing down, I'm going to become this, and then using discipline to sort of force myself into it, I didn't even have to try. But because of the power of the vision that I saw, and the dynamic of that moment, and my trust and love for my father, my life was completely different 6 months later. And I didn't even have to try, but it's because the picture I saw didn't match what I was in the moment. And so it just literally, so there's a gap between what is, where we are, and the vision, or where we want to be. And the if that gap is big, the larger that gap is, the more dissonance, the more lack of comfort, the more negative energy, if you will. Or it can be positive energy too, because it's like a rubber band. If you pull a rubber band vertical up and down, the further you stretch it apart, the more it wants to come back together. So take the top of the rubber band, make that your vision, let's say, and the bottom of the rubber band is the current reality. So the further that goes apart, the more it wants to snap back. The question is, will the vision come back down to the current reality? Or will the current reality become the vision? And the answer to the which one will win is, it is the most dominant, vivid picture you have. Is it your dominant, vivid picture your current reality? Or is it your vision? Is it where you want to go? Because what happens is, it changes our belief of ourselves. It changes what we, like we started out on the call, what we believe is possible. Like what Dr. Rotella said on the airplane, convince yourself, what I mean? That you can be the best. So that's, to me, one of the most powerful things is to try to take the time. They say, don't work. You probably quoted this, because you're such a pro at these podiatry practices. It's like, you got to get out of working in your business and start working on your business, right? That's what you help them do, I would think, right? So to me, that's part of it. Is part of it is getting out and working on. So that's one thing. And then there's the power of vision. The other thing is this concept of the 4 R's. Never lie to yourself. Get real clear about what your values are, what's truly important to you, which includes your vision. Okay. Be physically, mentally, and emotionally healthy. Take care of your body. Exercise, keep your attitude in good shape. Yeah, those are the things that I think of that help you, because then you build a person who naturally brings prosperity into their own life. Because we're not going to be prosperous doing things that don't bring prosperity. We become prosperous because we're being prosperous.
I love that. I love all of it. The vision part reminds me of Napoleon Hill, and Napoleon Hill kind of plays a game with you in Think and Grow Rich and the subsequent books that have been written. And he'll say, the most important thing, the great secret. I've already shared it with you. Do you know what it is? Do you know what it is? And he'll move along with that. And, and it comes to whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve. And I know that's a bumper sticker. And I know that's something people have heard over and over again, but it's what you just said. It's what Tim Ferriss said. It's what your father said. Whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it can achieve, but it has to believe it. And you have to do it with an obsessive, passionate approach, a burning desire. Jay, if you were a toy, any toy at all, what would it be and why?
Oh, that is so hard. That is just really something. That question. I think, golly, I think that I have to say, it would probably be a really, like, to me, what would be a fun, of course it's a toy, but a sports car, a motorcycle, a bullet bike, something like that.
And why?
Why? Gosh, probably it's really funny how life is, how people are. There's this thing called an autobiographical statement, and I think that's what I just did. I like to go fast and I like to have fun. So maybe that's why I said that. I like sports cars. I don't have one, but maybe too conservative, too much common sense, maybe. But why? Gosh, I don't know. Maybe because that's what I'd like to have, and that's what the toy I'd like is, those kinds of things.
Doesn't surprise me about you. I mean, the one thing I remember, and it was a few years ago, and maybe 5 or more, you were mountain biking, which, for people our age is insane. And apparently you were going really fast. You had a great big wreck and you really, really injured yourself.
Yeah.
Sort of permanently. And I think you're recovered, but, there's definitely, so some of that thrill is in there for you. And that's great. I mean, that's just great. Not me. I don't do that.
Well, yeah, my knee has bounced back and we're totally good. In fact, I was wake surfing a couple of nights ago, right? I never knew what that was. My neighbor's got this. In fact, Tim, who introduced me to you, Timothy Seward. We're still neighbors. We went out and went wake surfing. So wake surfing, for those of you that don't know, I never knew this, right? So I'll just say real quickly, he's got this boat that creates a large wake. They do it on purpose. And you get on this wakeboard and you got the rope and you're being pulled behind the boat. Well, you get in the wake and then you throw the rope on the boat. And then you're surfing without a rope on the wake behind the boat, right? I never knew that was a thing. Anyway, we had a blast doing that, but I almost re-injured my knee again, but it didn't. I did not, so I was grateful. But
I told you, I've got to do it. And I say, but what about your hands? So yeah, I'm a careful guy about that. Diane has spent many times with me on a motorized thing that's supposed to be fun, like a boat that can go, bullet, boom, boom, boom. And I drive them around like put, 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 put. I just don't want to have any problems. That's me. I've always been that way.
That's awesome.
Hey, one last question, and you cannot say the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Okay.
But can you recommend just one great book we should all be reading?
I'll tell you, I've got a book I love, and it's called How Champions Think. And it's by Dr. Bob Rotella, who I've talked about today.
Yeah.
It's a super book. Really, really great book. I recommend it highly.
Wonderful. Well, Jay Henderson, my friend, my incredible resource for all of my Top Practices members and all the help that you've given us. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your stories. This has been an incredibly great addition to my little trip along, trying to find not just prosperity, but something greater. So thank you, Jay. Just stay safe and healthy and have a wonderful day. Enjoy that beautiful family you've got.
Oh, you're so kind. You're great at this, by the way. I love your podcast. I really enjoy it. You're very, very good at this. So don't stop. Keep doing this. I've enjoyed being here. Thank you for your kind words and for having me on, Rem. I appreciate it.
I'll talk to you really soon.
Great.
Prosperity, flourishing, and thriving. Overcoming ourselves, playing at the top of our profession, reaping the rewards of a dedication to being our best. Once again, we are moving beyond prosperity and glimpsing at something even greater. And I sincerely hope you are enjoying this as much as I am. Let me know what you think. You can send me an email at rem@toppractices.com. Prosperity is the entire focus of Top Practices. Most doctors are struggling with the business of medicine, and those that aren't truly understand that through association with other successful practitioners, they can take their business to the next level or something even greater, like prosperity. Prosperity in business is a function of mindset, marketing, and management. In my opinion, in that order, and that is our mission at Top Practices. You can find out more about Top Practices, our marketing and management programs for doctors, our workshops, and annual summit at toppractices.com. Until next time, this is Rem Jackson. Smile when you wake up, and then have a really great day. Nothing is more important.